In this video, we will learn the basics of how to finger drum, starting first by explaining what it is and how it can help you as a music maker, to going over what equipment you'll need and how to set it up, and then finally ending by going through the learning process, where I'll cover tips and tricks that will help set you on your way to becoming a finger drumming master. Hello there, my inspirations. My name is Inspirasper, and in this video, we're gonna learn how to finger drum. Now, finger drumming is the practice of playing audio samples on a set of physical buttons with your fingers. This is done with the help of two major components, hardware and software. First, let's talk about hardware. In order to press buttons with your fingers, you'll need something to press. This comes in the form of a MIDI controller. Specifically, you'll be looking into a MIDI controller that has some sort of a button grid, and these buttons are known as pads. In this video, I will be using a Hercules P32 DJ controller. After playing around with it a bit, I can personally testify the pads feel sturdy and natural to the touch, and I would recommend you pick it up for yourself if you're looking for a finger drumming controller. A link will be in the description below if you want to check out this controller for yourself and follow along with this video. Now, on to software. While we do live in a golden era of the music industry where MIDI controllers are smarter and more powerful than ever, unfortunately, your controller can't quite live up to its full potential without using some sort of software to communicate with it. In our case, this is how we'll virtually assign audio files, or samples, to each corresponding pad on our controller. This is where the magic happens, and you see how finger drumming starts to diverge from your average everyday drum kit. We have the flexibility to move and rearrange samples to our liking. Want to replace your snare with some sort of irrelevant meme? Creeper. The Hercules P32 DJ controller will come with an application called DJing, which is perfect for live DJ performances and can be used for finger drumming. However, it's worth noting that if you have any experience with a DAW, you can use that alongside your controller. For example, I will be using Ableton Live in this video for a little bit, since that's a piece of software I'm familiar with. At the end of the day, the software will be used to assign our samples to our controller, so I'd just recommend using whatever you're most comfortable with. So, after you've acquired your hardware and downloaded your software, the next step is to go hunting for some drum samples. The internet is a plentiful and boundless resource for samples. I'd recommend you do a little digging on your own and search for drum samples in the genre of music you most enjoy or want to play. If future bass is your jam, look up future bass kicks. If you like trap, then look into downloading trap drum loops. If you want something more authentic, consider looking into acoustic percussion samples. Use your best judgment when searching for samples. Don't trust sketchy sites, whatnot. The internet rules apply here, you know? But getting your hands on higher quality samples will ultimately step up your finger drumming game. Once you have your samples, it might be a good idea to put all your audio files in one folder on your computer for easy access and organization. We will be using this folder to drag and drop samples onto our pads in our software. So let's go ahead and do that now. Open up DJing or the DAW of your choice and plug in your controller. In DJing, you can find your sampler for the left and right grids of pads right here. If you don't see this view by default, you can click the drop-down menu in the top left corner of the application and select any view that contains the word sampler. This is the virtual representation of the physical buttons on your controller. You can quickly navigate to the directory you stored your samples in by going to the library at the bottom and finding the folder you created. At this point, you can drag audio files into your sampler, and pressing the button that lit up on your controller should play audio. Your samples can play in different modes, and I believe by default these samples should loop. If you find your sample is looping and want it to stop, hold down the shift button next to your pads and press your button again. While this mode is very cool and useful when performing live, this may not be what you want for a finger drumming session. You can change the mode of a single sample by clicking this gear icon on your sampler and then selecting your sample. Clicking the type drop-down menu will show different modes the sample can be in. Let's select trigger so when we press the button, the sample plays once and only once, and will play from the beginning when we press it again. If you'd like to change the default mode of all new samples that are dragged onto your sampler, you can scroll down in the summary panel of the sampler settings window until you see default drop. Let's also set this to be trigger, so all newly added samples will behave the same way. Feel free to experiment with the modes of your samples. This can make for an interesting and unique experience if you have, say, gated samples or an underlying loop. If you are using a DAW such as Ableton Live, you can set up your controller by creating a MIDI layer and assigning a drum rack to that layer, also being sure to arm your track for recording to receive MIDI input from your hardware. At this point, you can assign samples to your drum rack, which correspond to your pads. Each software will be slightly different in terms of the interface, but again, ultimately, they all accomplish the same goal of just powering our controller by holding our audio samples. So, now that our controller and software is set up, the next thing to do is consider your pad layout. And by this, I mean which types of drum samples to put on which buttons. While some people argue certain layouts are better than others, and they have their reasons for believing that, at the end of the day, it's for you to decide which layout is best for you. Ultimately, it doesn't make sense to arrange your drums in a fashion that isn't intuitive for you. So this is where you can experiment and play around with the different layouts. After doing some digging of my own and watching other finger drumming tutorials, I found this is a layout that came naturally to me, so I decided to stick with it. Next, we're on to the fun part, which is actually finger drumming. It can be tough just starting off to get the hang of performing with both hands. So the first tip I'll share with you is to start slow. If you have a drum beat in mind, dissect that into its simplest form, usually just as a kick and a snare. Strip away any complicated bits such as subtle hi-hats or any offbeat percussion, and just start by practicing your kick and snare. It may sound dumb, but if you're just starting off, practicing just a kick and snare loop by itself over and over and over again will ultimately make you a better finger drummer. Remember to stay on beat. If you find it difficult to keep a consistent pattern, it may be a good idea to play alongside a metronome. Similarly, it may be a good idea to start with a slower BPM and work your way up. This way you can buy more time to focus on memorizing the pattern you have laid out in front of you. After you play that on repeat, eventually it'll just become muscle memory, and you can start throwing more elements into the mix more easily. I found a fun exercise to both improve my muscle memory and practice my rhythm was to set up my BPM to automate over time in Ableton. My BPM first started somewhere in the middle 70s and slowly ramped up over time. I made sure my metronome was on and played the simplest kick and snare beat, just being sure to land on time. This helped me actively think about my rhythm at any given moment and ensured I wasn't off beat. Once I was able to perform this pattern without thinking about where my fingers should go, I added in a hi-hat on the offbeat and did the same thing. This is just one more element into the mix, but adds so much more variety, and now you can see how over time, this can evolve into something more exciting. From there, you could switch it up by performing a different hi-hat every other offbeat. Again, more variety, more complexity. Continue adding elements into the mix until you get something you're happy with. One thing you can consider to spice things up is you aren't limited to performing one sample at any given moment. It may be more interesting to play a cymbal at the same time as your kick drum, for example. This adds more complexity, but again, you just have to practice and practice and practice until it becomes natural. Now, this is only using one hand. You could throw another hand into the mix, either on your same sample pad or even the other one, your choice, to perform other elements. And this is where things get exciting, because as much as the term is finger drumming, you aren't limited to just percussion samples. You could drag in any audio file, which means you could be performing snippets of a song or actual audio samples of an instrument. Once you get comfortable with the process of finger drumming, you can cover or even create entire songs. And hopefully, the tips and tricks covered in this video will help set you on your way to going down that path where you will ultimately someday become a finger drumming master. So that'll do it for this video. If you enjoyed this tutorial or thought it helped in the slightest bit, consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps me make higher quality content. I wish you all the best of luck, thank you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.